right, so this is episode 4 of Dungeons and Tangents, which now finally has a name. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about narration. My name is Erik Dewhurst.
I'm Chris Rutledge.
And Chris comes to us from where?
New York, New Jersey area. Yeah, I'll go with that.
Narration is probably a ridiculously broad subject.
Yeah.
The first kind of sub-subject that comes to mind is first person versus third person versus second person.
Yeah.
You
kind of have to look at it two ways, right? As a player and as a DM. Yeah. As a DM, you need to be able to get your story across in multiple ways. So through your narration, it's incredibly important that you're getting your key information and you're able to get across your story without really spelling it out for the players. I know when I first started, and you're building your campaign and you're coming up with some of your narration points of maybe describing the town that everyone is going to be going into or the environment that everyone's going into, and you have so much information that you want to convey to them, but you don't want to overload them at the same time, right? Like that's incredibly difficult to do. So using narration in the right way to tell your story and getting that key piece of information off is a bit tricky, especially for first-time DMs.
I was gonna say, do you write most of your own campaigns from scratch?
So it depends. If I am playing in Pathfinder, I haven't done any DMing in Pathfinder yet.
Oh, okay.
But from my experience so far, it's only been adventure paths, and the adventure paths are written out really well, and they give you the content to narrate to the players. So that problem is kind of solved for you. Which is, I think, one of the reasons why I really like Pathfinder and their adventure paths.
You can be a lazy DM.
Well, but it's great for first-time DMs though too, right?
Yeah.
So for me, and I know tangent part of the podcast.
Oh yeah.
When I first got into it, I was a bit younger, and third edition had just come out, and we started getting into it, and we go into the stores and we'd go through all these pages and we started to realize like what it meant to be a DM and how much information you had to constantly convey to your players, and that's incredibly overwhelming for a young kid. So as time went on, I think the people of Paizo kind of realized that. So when they created these adventure paths, especially for first-time DMs, it is a little bit hand-holding, but it's done so well because it's done by real writers who are used to narrating and creating scenes and being able to deliver information properly at the right time too. It's given them the ability to get used to it. And I think it's great jumping off points to use as an example for when they want to actually go and create their own environment or create their own campaign.
And I was an idiot. And the first campaign I ran, I was just like, I'm going to make it up from scratch.
They're not wrong with that.
Well, there's nothing wrong with it.
But it's tough. It's tough, especially if you have nothing to lead off from an example.
Right. Robert gave me some examples. He gave me Sunless Citadel, and I played some with him.
Yeah.
Mine's a Fandelver, and he gave me Temple of Elemental Evil, which is horrible. So he gave me examples of what not to do, what to do, and then played some games with him. And then I spent a month writing a campaign.
And I'd say that's probably your baseline of what you want to hit before you even think about introducing something to a player.
Yeah.
Is spending about a month's time writing, backstory, scenery, NPCs, and the lives of the NPCs that you're going to be interacting with.
And I think a lot of DMing comes down to engaging the player. I mean, that's like if you're not engaging the player, then it's all over.
Yeah, absolutely.
Making all the backstories for like every NPC in that first village that I wrote had like too much backstory. Every one of them had, and of course they went into town, talked to the barkeep, moved on,
and they went right by everyone else. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can't railroad the players, right?
No.
Because at that point, then there's no point in playing.
My intention was to make it a lush, huge environment with,
and you're
with
hoping,
so much content.
You're hoping they're going to talk to everybody because they think you're thinking,
or anybody.
Yeah, because you're expecting them like, oh, well, let's go talk to this person. Maybe they have a clue about this scenario or something else. Yeah, it's sometimes that's probably one of the toughest things about being a DM is creating all that content, hoping that they touch it, and full well knowing in the back of your mind, especially if you're an experienced DM, that it's all going to go to shit at some point.
Yeah, I've learned to accept that every piece of content I write may not be used now. It may be used later.
But it can be used later. Yeah. Never throw it away.
No.
Ever. If you write something down, definitely keep it. Don't get rid of it. Hold on to those ideas because they absolutely can be reused. And who knows, you may have scripted out a 6-month timeline or a 20-session timeline, and that timeline is probably going to go to crap. But save that other stuff for other timelines and other stories. Keep that as inspiration. Never get rid of it, ever.
So, bringing it back to narration, because we just went off on how do you write a campaign. That's fine. When you play, do you play in character?
For about 75% of the time, yes.
Okay.
I'll give a great example actually because this is a character that I've been wanting to play around with, a character idea. I looked online before and a bunch of other people have done it, and I took some cues from them. So in the Pathfinder session that I'm playing in, I play a half-orc who had his tongue cut out. Yeah. So through his backstory, through his upbringing as a child, he had his tongue cut out as an act of disobedience and correction of that disobedience. Really harsh. But
it's harsh to play as a...
And I wanted that limitation because I wanted to challenge myself a little bit and see how I could do it. And we are about a dozen sessions in, and it's actually working out really well.
That's insane.
Now, before I did that, though, I asked the other players that I was playing with, this is the route I'm going. Are you guys okay with this, right? Because it's going to be a little bit of a difficult challenge.
That puts a lot of onus on them to interpret your communications.
Yes, which is also, depending on who you play with, absolutely hysterical. Because the way I approached it was they had initially run up to him in a town. He's a war priest, so he has a real large interest in other cultures and other religions. So he had come to this new town, wanted to check out this new temple, and he had run into them in their daily interactions throughout the town. And one of the first things that happens is there's a town fair, and he comes up across this strength test. And one of the other characters is at the strength test. And the entire thing, the character doesn't say a single word, but he ends up intimidating in a funny way the other character just through his emotions, his range of body language, and the other acts that he does. And he still conveys that he's someone of a holy person. He's obviously a very strong, intimidating person, but the entire time he's smiling. He's got the doofiest smile on his face. So the other character is having a problem interpreting this intimidating yet smiling person as they're like doing something aggressive but a smile on their face. Like it depends on how you convey those actions and that body language and the character.
That must have taken a lot of... Were you acting all of this out?
No, a lot of it was
describing,
narrating.
Okay, so you are narrating kind of as a third person.
Yep.
Whatever your character's name is does this.
Yes.
He's doing this. He's doing that.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. He's I'm narrating out the actions and describing it enough where I'm not forcing an emotion on the other person that I'm discussing, which is really tough too. You've got to be really careful because as you're narrating out, so say So say you're trying to narrate a character who's trying to do some type of intimidation check on another person. You don't want to say, Seren walks up to Dova and stares at him grimacingly and strikes fear in his eye. You can't force that emotion on someone. You have to be able to know your point to stop, and then hopefully that person can also reciprocate and convey the proper emotion back to your action.
Right.
So it is kind of a give and take. It really depends. You have to know your audience too. You have to know who you're playing with, and some of the people that you're playing with might not be really into role playing or really into narrating. So you have to also accept that you can invest all of this narration and not get anything back, but still be okay with that, because they might not be able to convey that they're getting anything out of it, but internally they're probably enjoying the hell out of it.
Yeah, that's
so it's a bit of a give and take.
So Robert and I talked about the same idea last time about how you, as a DM or a player, you're painting a picture.
Yeah.
And you can't tell somebody what their decision is. But you can paint a picture of the reality and hope that they perceive it the way that you want them to, so that they'll make a decision based on a correct perception.
Yep. Yeah.
And so you have to paint a picture of your character so that people perceive it accurately. And at times, as a DM, sometimes you'll have to say, you think or you perceive something. And that it crosses the line where you're not just describing the situation, but you're telling them what they perceive. And that gets hairy.
Yeah, but so as the DM, your mission is to make sure that they're receiving the information you're trying to convey properly. As a player, I think the only onus as a player you have from a character standpoint is you're able to convey what that character feels at that time or doing. Yeah. And outside of that, that is it. The DM does have the ability to modify that feeling of that character, I think, because
feeling?
Yes.
Okay.
The reason why I'll say that is because we're still within game rules, right? So you know what somebody's intelligence score is. So you can use their intelligence score and say, okay, Seren walked up to this painting of what Seren initially feels is a very dark and mysterious painting, but Seren's intelligence score and his knowledge of maybe a religion or a local will realize that this is actually a holy painting of Desna, and he's suddenly inspired by that. You can change their feeling without necessarily changing the narration. Right. But you need to know what those cues are. You need to know what those limits are. And I think that's why some of the stats and some of the skills behind those characters is important. And you, as a DM, you probably need to at least have a small one-off to be able to utilize those to help reason why you're changing that character's perception or feeling of that moment.
That seems reasonable. I think that gray area of changing perception is cool. It's when the line that Robert and I talked about, I think it was last time, was you can't tell them what they decide based on their feelings.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah. No. Yeah, that's tough. That's definitely tough because you. Well, at that point, you're kind of railroading the character,
exactly,
right? And you want to avoid the railroad as much as possible.
You're taking away their
free will.
Their free will. Yeah, their free will. They're no longer playing the game. You're playing the game for them if you're making decisions for them.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And then you're essentially taking the player's and character's choice out of their hands, and at that point, like you said, it's not their game anymore. It's yours.
So new subject. When you're playing as a DM, when you're DMing a game, do you?
It's still play.
It's still playing. I suppose it is. Sometimes it feels like work.
Yeah. Not for me anyway.
When you're a DM, do you always do all your NPCs in in a character? Like, do you speak in their voices?
Oh man, I try. I know I try, and I think you've seen an example of it.
I've seen some great ones.
When I've guessed it in, I always try to throw in a character to it.
Yeah.
I try to because even if it's a mundane character voice, like if someone goes into a shop or you're in a barkeep, or you're in a bar and you're interacting with a barkeep. Even in normal life, those people have stories. Those people are going to have attitudes and certain perceptions. So say if you go into a bar and you're dealing with a maiden that is serving you food or beer, and that person's had a bad day. In real life, you could go into Starbucks and your barista is going to have an awful day, and they're probably going to give you an attitude.
Right.
It adds to the flair and it adds to the environment, and I really do try as hard as I can to try to be able to do that. It depends on my mood too, and it depends on the session. If I'm just starting out and the first thing somebody's doing is interacting with an NPC, oh yeah, they're gonna get a full-fledged out NPC at that point. But if we're just getting out of a dungeon and they're coming back into town and it's almost like 5 minutes when I think I'm going to end the session,
right,
I'm going to try to put something in there, but I'm also not really thinking about it at the time. And that's probably me just getting tired, like mentally and physically tired. But also, when you come across a random NPC, like an NPC that I need to come up with right then and there, that's a little harder, and maybe I'll go to like one or two generic voices and attitudes that I might keep with me. But yeah, and also I'm trying to think the best example to put this through. So drow characters are usually universally hated, no matter whether we're talking about D&D or Galarian through Pathfinder. Drow are hated everywhere.
Right.
If any character comes across a drow, that drow is going to have a specific attitude. Or if an NPC has, if you're playing an NPC and that NPC comes across a drow or even a half drow as a player character, you need to be able to convey some type of emotion properly, because everyone is going to be either scared crapless of that drow or immediately threatened and want to fight it. Right. So you have to be able to recognize that, drows have this notorious infamy. You have to convey that properly, and if you don't, you're doing an injustice, I think, to the other players too. Because if they come across a drow again later on, they're not going to feel that emotion. They're not going to feel that terror or fear, and they might make a dumb decision, and you end up killing them.
And that's kind of that goes into the believability of the world. If your players know that drows are the evil elves of the world that everybody wants to avoid if they can, and you have an interaction that's mundane
or even chipper,
right?
Yeah.
Then any player that comes to the table with that background of knowing the history of drow is going to be like, what the hell's going on here?
Yeah, it's going to take them out, right? It's definitely going to take them out of what their initial perception is, yeah. And you're also doing an injustice to some of the newer players that may have never experienced it too, right? You want to make sure that the idea that you have in your mind is as close to the idea that they're going to have in their mind as well, right? You want to make sure everybody's on the same level. As bizarre as this is,
I haven't played a huge amount of D&D. I have never interacted with drow or Duragar. Bizarrely, not in the gameplays that I've done.
Yeah, I mean, it takes time. So one thing for me that drives me crazy sometimes is some people will try to throw every iteration of race and class at you all the time, no matter where you are.
I couldn't do that as a DM. That's tiring.
So part of me thinks it might be just because they're not confident in their own storytelling, or they think they need to spice things up. You're not going to run into drow in the middle of of a small farming town in the middle of the forest, right? You're probably never going to run into them there. Or if you're in the middle of a mountain range, or if you're in mines, you're probably going to run into a dwarf at some point.
Yeah.
If you don't, that's a little disappointing, right? Because there's different races and there's different classes, and they all have their own habitats. And if you're just throwing random creatures in an area because you really want to play with them, well, you're kind of doing a little bit of a disservice.
Yeah, that makes me think of what, of course, almost all D&D plays off of Tolkien a lot, and he does such a great job of saying, this is the Hobbit area, this is the human area, this is the elf area, and these are their cultures, and these are how their cultures are different, and so much of D&D is just blatantly ripped off from that.
Oh yeah, I mean, without Tolkien we wouldn't have any of this, so
no.
Another reason why, and I swear to God, I am not a Paizo employee, but another reason why I like their adventure paths is because they really do concentrate on knowing that you are in a specific area and you are more than likely going to run into a certain subset of creatures and races, and they explain why they're there, what they're doing there, what their purpose is. Why you may even run into a creature you normally wouldn't expect, probably because of X, Y, and Z. And you should maybe expect them because they might be there, whether they may have been left over from another war, and some of them are stragglers, stuff like that. Like
they've been hired by somebody who's part of the campaign.
They give a lot of backstory and reason as to why some of them are there.
I've been listening to that Glass Cannon a lot, and there was at least one example of that. There's a troll of some sort in their first campaign that they deal with, and one of the players is like, "Oh, there's a troll here. This doesn't make sense."
Yep. Yeah. There was
the DM had a backstory for it.
Yeah, exactly. There was, I believe, one of them was a cave troll and another large creature, and normally those two creatures would never interact with each other. In fact, they're almost hated enemies. I can't off the top of my head remember what the creature was, but there's a reason for it, right? You don't know what the reason for is yet. You may have been given a small sample, but there's definitively a reason for that creature being there, whether it's tied into the campaign, whether it's tied into the setting or environment that they're in. There's always a reason for them to be there. It's not just thrown in for flavor or spice. It's critical to the story and critical to the environment and the experience.
Almost every subject related to narration comes back to, is it believable?
Yeah.
And is it engaging? One of those two.
It has to be, right? So one of the things for narration that really struck home with me as a DM was that I realized if I wanted to be able to convey that story and environment properly, I needed to read a lot more than I currently do now. And because
I'm screwed. I can barely read it all.
But it helps though, like being able to draw inspiration and think of different ways of describing something really does help. And the best way to do that is to read other authors who maybe not even in fantasy, but like steampunk or sci-fi. Just taking some examples of how they are relaying information or how they're painting pictures for you as you're reading through chapters is super helpful.
Would you say you said fantasy, sci-fi? Steampunk falls into one of those two. But all of those are genres where you have to describe something that's not of our reality.
So regardless of whether it's sci-fi, steampunk, cyberpunk, or even like you said, things based on our reality, as long as the author is really good at describing the environment you're in, and you're able to get a really good picture in your head about what they're conveying to you, it takes some of those ideas and bring them in and use them, because if it's working for you,
as a reader,
as long as you can convey it in a very similar way, it's definitely going to work for your players too.
Yeah, it's building your own vocabulary for how to describe a world in a way that's believable.
Absolutely.
For me, like, Tolkien is an obvious example of somebody who does such a good job of describing at least landscapes.
Yeah.
But he does, I think, kind of a shit job of personalities.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at like if you compare all the hobbits together, they're almost kind of all the same, right?
Yeah.
A hobbit is a hobbit is a hobbit is
and
a
the
hobbit.
dwarves, every dwarf except Oakenshield is like, they're all pretty much the same. Okay, Bomber's got something going.
Yeah.
And
so complete opposite end of that, George R.R. Martin, fantastic at building out personalities and motivations and emotion out of each of these people, and the fact that he's able to do that and then throw them away as quickly as they appear has to say something about just how really good he's at. He can do that.
That reminds me of something. I just was listening to a podcast the other day from Wizards of the Coast. It was the official D&D podcast.
Oh yeah,
it's kind of all over the place. Like, it's not the most consistent or
they interview anybody who says anything about D&D or even plays.
I'm sure we'll be on there someday. But Chris Perkins was talking about something. They asked Chris Perkins, "What is your number one advice for a DM?" And he said, "Don't be afraid. Don't fear that you'll run out of ideas.
Yep.
Stop fearing that you'll run out of ideas and just use every idea that comes to mind, because there'll be more later."
Absolutely.
Which apparently George R.R. Martin doesn't care.
No,
he knows that tomorrow he'll write another character.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. No, you can't be afraid. And I think that's probably one of the biggest reasons why a lot of people don't get into D&D is fear. Whether it's social anxiety or not being able to believe in yourself that you can create a different world than or even convey a world to someone else that you might not have never dabbled in. You know, it's tough.
So here's a question that I always wish I would ask myself, and I always don't, but I hear other DMs ask themselves, which is, I have a character, who's the actor that would play it?
Oh man,
do you do that?
I try to. I mean, Glass Cannon Podcast.
They do that all the time.
They do it all the time, and I am amazed at some of the references that these guys pull off. It's fantastic. And now, with that being said, two of them are actors. One of them is a playwright, and one of them is a voiceover agent, and the other one is a cameraman. So their experience in the film industry is kind of a lot higher than mine. Yeah. But I watch random movies. I just never remember a name. I could put a face to someone, but can never remember a name.
Yeah, ever. I have trouble.
But that helps. That absolutely helps, because especially if you know that that person has played a really significant character, and even if you tie it to that person and that character, that other people would know, right? That helps in that perception of that person, the perception of that NPC, and kind of what their attitude might be, and even puts a voice in their head. So even if you don't use a character voice and you use your own voice, that voice still kind of sticks in their head too, if there's that association. So that absolutely helps. I don't even think it takes away from the experience, because they're not thinking about the movie, they're just thinking about that character and what that character sounds like and how that character is perceived.
And I think in the players' heads, they might think of the game as kind of a movie. Yeah. And now that you have actors assigned to roles, it starts feeling even more like a movie, because you feel the depth in your head of, you know, what does Patrick Stewart bring to being this king? Yep. Oh, well, holy shit. I know what Patrick Stewart would do sitting in that throne, disapproving of somebody.
His mannerisms and the way he would, his tone and his cadence. Absolutely. Yeah.
And totally. Even though me as a DM, I'm not going to do a very good Patrick Stewart impersonation.
No.
I got the hair down.
The bald head, and that's about it. Yeah, go figure. So that also, I think, ties back into what we were talking about before in regards to reading a book. If an author is able to paint that picture in your head really, really well, then you're doing the same thing for your players, right? That's really the object. You want to be able to get that movie-scape going in your head.
Yeah.
You want that movie-scape going in your player's head too. So if you think that's going to help them, I think it's a great mechanism.
Yeah, I just need to do it more often.
It's tough. It's not easy. Yeah.
I need to remind myself to, like, whenever I create an NPC, or the questions I need to ask myself.
Yep.
Who's playing them? What's their motivation? And what are they willing to do to get what they want?
Yep.
This is actually Matt Colville. He did a session on NPCs. He said there's 2 questions you need to ask. What do they want? What are they willing to do to get it?
Yeah.
And once you know those 2 things, everything
kind of falls into place.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Motivation, especially for characters, really is kind of the engine that will drive their interaction with your players.
And as a DM, do you ever kind of ping your players and ask them questions that'll vet out their characters more, so that they'll add more depth?
So I think one of the best things a DM can do is, after maybe narrating or just having a lot of communication to the player about kind of what's going on, you should stop and ask that player what their character is thinking at that time, right? So say a specific event happens. Say there's a character death or an NPC death. Pause after the event happens and do a quick round table of each of the characters or each of the players and ask them, so what is Saren thinking right now? He sees Dova die right in front of him. Her throat is slit and their life has been taken out of their body and is now laying in the rocks. And Saren has this backstory with this person. What's going through his head right now? Let that player develop that character right there, and then that also gives motivation to the other players at the table to then feed off of that and build their characters just through that session alone. Like, even if they don't have that great of a backstory, that person will try to convey maybe even their own emotion that they're feeling, whether it's their characters or not. Absolutely. Like, ask them what their character's feeling at that time, or what their reaction is to what has just happened.
I just realized I've missed some great opportunities to help players, like, build their characters.
Yeah.
And I think I've, more often than not, railroaded past important moments in time and just been like,
tough.
Okay, somebody just died. Let's. What do you want to do next?
Yeah.
Well, let's leave town. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
All right. Let's go for beers. Hooray, dead people. No, that's tough, man. Yeah, you gotta. But that's just growing as a DM, right? Like, you're not going to get that on session 1. You're probably not going to get that on session 20. But
that was session 15 or 16.
But hopefully by session 50 or session 100, you're starting to build yourself as a DM, and you're starting to add that to your repertoire.
So I didn't ask you at the beginning. Normally I ask, how long have you been playing D&D or some variant of D&D?
So got into 3rd edition when I think I was 12.
That's about when Robert and I first started.
When I first started, but prior to that, that's when I first started playing. Prior to that, I had known about it for quite a while. I would say probably since I was like 6 or 7. At one point, before I started playing, I was so into Tolkien and I was so into fantasy. I really loved dragons just because of the importance in almost every story at that time that a dragon had played, and the fact that they were almost like looked at like gods, and they were these mythical creatures that, always there, but their origin stories were never really fleshed out. Like, no one ever explicitly, or at least most authors back then, never explicitly said dragons were made from X, Y, and Z because of this long hair. No, it was always just
just there.
There was just the world, and there was always dragons, and it was just kind of like an accepted thing. But I really got into it. I remember I bought at the time, and my mom was really confused and tried throwing it away. I believe the book was named The Anatomy of Dragons.
Oh, I
and
remember
it had just a list of different origin stories of different dragons, different types, why they were there, why they were revered, why they were feared, what certain authors were using them as for tools for conveying war or conveying destruction or conveying the end of the world, and they were more metaphorical than anything else. And
That's
stuff like
a rather
that.
in-depth thing to get.
As an 8-year-old, yeah, I know. But I kept it over the years, and I used a lot of that content in inspiring me when I got older, just from like creating the character creation and stuff like that. And I loved the in-depth explanation for it. So I think that ended up, when I got into D&D, really motivated me when I started getting into like the religions in like Pathfinder and D&D, like all the deities and why they drove certain people and why they drive certain characters, and why did this deity have a war with another deity, and what the cause was and what their faiths were about and stuff.
Kind of building the political landscape behind the setting.
And a lot of character motivation is always, at least in fantasy, based off of somebody's deity or their experience, their religious experience that they've had.
Another quote from Matt Colville, which is a quote from somebody else. He says, fantasy is when your world reflects the emotions of your characters. So the deities are warring and the world is in conflict, and there are volcanoes and there's this forces of nature all around that are in conflict, and that usually is a reflection of the conflict between people.
Absolutely. One of probably the most common tropes, at least from a D&D story perspective, right, is the paladin versus anti-paladin, right? The good versus evil, and every representation of good versus every representation of evil, right?
Yeah.
So, it basically all boils down to that almost.
Which, I can't remember if it was... No, it wasn't on any of these podcasts. I was talking about the origin of most fantasy is Beowulf, which is the ultimate good warrior versus the ultimate evil force of nature.
Yeah. It's, I mean, it's the same. Almost every adventure is, at some point, boils down to the same story being told over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we're not really original
No.
in any way, shape, or form, but we enjoy it. And in the end, that's really all that matters. As long as you're able to convey a really cool story, you might have some nice plot twists here and there, some character deaths.
And hopefully the thing that I really look forward to when I go into D&D is being able to tell a story, if I'm a DM, tell a story and have everybody else be like, hell yeah, let's get into this story, and modify the story and change it from what I thought.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
the first time I played, I didn't think I wanted that. I wanted to railroad them.
Yep.
But after like 6 or 7 sessions, I'm like, oh, that's the magic sauce.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it takes time, right? It's not, and that's not something that... You can convey that to somebody as much as you want to. That needs to be experienced. Yeah. They have to learn by the seat of their pants in that one, right? Because one of two things are going to happen. You're going to find players who love to be railroaded and who want that path set for them. Fine, great. Or you're going to run into players who want to develop characters and want to be able to affect the story and know that their decision made a definitive change in this path that they're taking.
Right.
And you'll learn who your players are pretty quickly when you put them through one of those paces, whether they like it or not. So, every DM goes through that. And to be honest with you, even if you think that you've kind of shed that stigma, you'll find yourself coming back to it at some point. And I think learning and growing as a DM is knowing when you're doing that and kind of pulling back and saying, okay, I need to stop doing this. And that's a really good time when I think if you think you realize that that's happening, pull yourself out and let the players control it just by, again, asking them questions and letting them convey their characters a little bit more kind of pulls you out of that mindset a little bit.
Yeah, I'm gonna be making a lot of changes to the way I DM.
Good. No, you should, because like I said, it's all about growth. And as long as you're willing to accept change or know that you can change and that you want to and you want to take ideas, you'll be fine.
Yeah, but I'm sure there are plenty of people who play D&D or Pathfinder or some variant of a tabletop where they just want the path, and as a DM, they just want to have a good time, have some beers, eat some pizza, and just run through a hack and slash.
Yeah.
That's obviously not you and I.
No, definitely not. No, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
No.
There really isn't. If you're a DM and you're like that, find other players that want that. Right? Like, you have to be able to know your audience and know that what you're giving them is enjoyable, and they need to be able to convey that to you too. Right? Some people might not even realize that that's what they want.
Yeah.
And that's tough. That's. I think it all boils down to just having communication between you and your players and making sure that you know what they want and that they're aware of what your play style is.
Right.
And if you're so new that you don't know what your play style is, then just let it. Just try. Just let it happen. Don't try to force anything on anybody, but go with the flow. Be acceptant to change and be able to read your players to know if they're having fun or not.
Yeah. And I've been playing for a year and a half. I've been DMing for about a year, and it's been a lot of, hey, you want to play a game? Sure.
Yeah.
And that's it. And there's no discussion of what style of DM are you? And it turns out that I like a little more narrative and a lot less fight.
Yeah. I mean, so we used to play 4th edition. We still do. And one of the things that drives me crazy is that 4th edition is just so much fighting that I don't play that as much anymore. I still have this group that have been going on for 8 years, and we still play. Every once in a while we'll get together, like maybe once a month or once every other month, and we'll play just because it's friends getting together and having a good time. But yeah, man, some of those it's like a 4-hour fight, and you're like, why are we doing this? Why? Well, because we're sitting around having pizza and drinking beer. It's
right. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, it's just a mechanism for having fun. That's all it is.
I think we've kind of touched on the majority of
quite
everything.
a bit. Yeah. We definitely got into narration, and we definitely went on to some tangents.
Yeah.
So you're fulfilling the title of the podcast pretty well. Not bad.
I don't think we specifically used the word dungeon. Did we?
I did once describing coming out of a dungeon, and that was about it.
Fair enough.
100% fulfilled.
Good.
Great.
Are you going to be back in town anytime?
Probably in about a month or two. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll either do another session or we'll play a game that day.
Works for me.
Okay.
Absolutely. Great.
I think that's it. As usual, I give the end of podcast announcements. If you're listening to this, it would be insane if you don't subscribe, because obviously you're a glutton for pain and you want to listen to tangents nonstop. So subscribe, comment, tell Chris that he's a jerk.
I mean, I hear it all the time. It's fine, whatever.
Especially if you're the one troll who's been hitting us lately. What else?
Go listen to the Glass Cannon podcast. It's absolutely fantastic. I swear to God I don't work for them, but they're amazing.
And you're not in any episode of it?
No,
okay.
Not yet. That'd be great.
But
no, not yet. No. Right. It's fantastic. It literally, I think one of the reasons why I love it so much is it sounds exactly like me and my friend just sitting down and playing. It's awesome. It's just they do so good. Audio quality is amazing, and some of the character voices and characters that these guys have is just fantastic.
All right, I think that's all we've got. See you later.